Are you good there, Rudy? All right. I will call to order the City Hall Task Force meeting for Tuesday, December 3rd. It is 11:05, and we'll begin with roll call. Councilmember Osmus, would you begin?
Julie Osmus.
Sarah Swedberg.
Janelle Summers.
Steve Okens.
Rudy V. Hill.
Brian Grounds.
Fernando Alvarado.
Mark Calvin.
And Kathy Schwantes. Councilmember Meske will be joining us shortly. So, the handouts that are being passed around are basically what was emailed out to us. There is the addition of the minutes from our past meeting. Oh no, yes. From the City Hall Task Force meeting of August 20th. So knowing that people have not received this prior to the meeting, if you'd like to take just a moment to read through it, and then we would accept those minutes, that would be terrific.
Architect, one's construction manager.
Okay. So you need one of these.
Now accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to accept the August 20th City Hall Task Force meeting summary. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion carries. I'm not sure if we really needed that formal action on that, but we got it in case. Okay, very good. Also in your packet is a summary of the tours, one for September 27th and the other for November 6th. And hopefully you've had a chance to review those. I would just open it up for any comments. If there are any points of clarification, any additions, any changes that anyone needs or would like to see made to the summaries of those tours. Which, by the way, were fantastic, very worthwhile, and thank you all for your investment of time for having taken the tours. Councilmember Alvarado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to let you know I did try to download some pictures that I took from my iPhone. Was struggling with that. I talked to Ross. He's working on it right now. Downloading from my iPhone. I use a app that I use for work, and I don't know if there was a problem with that, but what's nice about the app is you can write a little description next to the picture, rather than just having a picture. So I'm hoping that transfers over with Ross's help. Thank you.
Very good. And there were also additional instructions that were emailed out to everyone, so if you have not yet submitted your photos, please do so. That would be helpful when we, as we move forward and want to recall thoughts and where we want to go and what we want to do at the site. So, okay. Any other comments in regard to the summary of the tours? Councilmember Osmus.
Just that the second, the one that we went on November 6th, it was the same architect for both buildings. So they were similar, but it was still nice to see just kind of the different way they personalized it and adapted to that city's needs. But very nice.
Very good. Thank you for having completed those for us to have that documentation. All right, moving along then, the proposed timeline. Administrator Gromans, can I have you walk us through the timeline?
Yes, I can do that. We're here, I guess, today on December 3 to kind of look through the
the RFPs and insert timelines so that we can, you know, come to conclusion on the whole process here. December 16th, city council meeting. The task force would recommend to the city council that we would authorize the advertising of RFPs for the construction manager and the architect, and approve the timeline as you see before you. Obviously, it can change for a variety of reasons. January 14th, the RFP proposals would be due. I kind of agonized over the, you know, like a whole month. But then I reviewed how the timing is going for the other RFPs, for the construction manager and the architect, and waiting through, you know, the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, and I kind of like, you know, it's put a lot of pressure on these individual firms to crank something out in a week and a half over the holidays. So, given the fact that we probably got a timeline that would allow this, I gave in essence, a month for response. Then January 15th through February 11th, then we would meet, you know, review and shortlist and hold interviews, and then recommend a construction manager firm and an architect engineering firm to the city council. At the February 18th meeting, the council would address that. Note that February 17th would be our normal city council meeting, but given it's a holiday, it would bump back one day. Now the design and construction timeline, I just wanted to give you maybe a short-term timeline and a long-term timeline, because you never know what's going to come up, you know, what's going to delay you. But I just wanted to make sure that even though everybody's excited about getting going and getting it done, and there could be things that, you know, slow us down, such as meeting with the architect and trying to define what our city hall looks like. That could take a long time, or it could take a short time. I don't have any control over that, but I just wanted to make sure that to let you know that it can work with you know, designing in February to the July, you know, bid the project in August, September, get the footings in the ground prior to winter freeze up, and then the contractor can, or the contractors can work all winter long if they wanted to. They don't have to, but they can, which is a much tighter timeline. And then on B, you have you know, basically taking in essence the whole month, the whole year of 2020, you know, to go through the design process and work through all the details and the coordination of the two facilities, and then start your bidding in January during the winter. Construction starts in April, you know, and you're probably going to finish somewhere, you know, in February timeframe. That's just a thumbnail sketch. It could be longer, it could be shorter, depends on what kind of materials you choose. If you decide to go with tip-up concrete panels, it's going to go up really fast. If you decide to do brick and block, it's going to go up really slow, and depending on the time of the year. You know, during the summer, brick and block go up. During the winter, you got to build a shelter for it to go up. So there's a lot of things that go in here that I just wanted to let you know that it's not the end of the world if it gets delayed, you know, through the design phase, because you end up doing most of the construction during the summer, and you're bidding in the spring. It's really not a bad deal to bid in the end of summer either, because they can get their footings and they get their groundwork done, and they can work all winter long. And some contractors looking for work for their employees during the winter. These kind of projects fill that gap. So you sometimes you even get lower cost project, even though they've got to heat it, and you know, so they can work in it all winter long. So it just depends on the dynamics of your project, what you build materials are going to be, and how your design timeline goes. If it's short, you can get on the short bandwagon. If it's long, you know, your timeline can accommodate that. So that's why I put the two in there. There's no one set timeline. each one of the steps can take longer than you think, or it could take shorter than I think. So I just wanted to put that on your radar that it's flexible. There's no, it has to be by this date, and it has to be, or else everything falls apart. It can go two ways, and this, I think, encompasses two logical timelines that it could possibly have.
Councilmember Osmus.
Of course, if I had my druthers.
Oh, we
I
all
like
have
that.
brothers.
I would prefer the shorter timeline, because I'm just thinking of all of the moving of stuff. And that, to me, would be a whole lot easier, and having the door open for all these things coming in and out in August. And even if it got pushed back a little, you still got August, September, October. You could still have 2 months built in there of moving stuff in, where February and March, I mean, I'm just thinking cold, blizzard, snow, and harder getting dollies in and out.
And that can happen, but I'm just saying, if the review team working with the architect gets hung up, and every little detail, that whole thing stretches out, if you go like, oh, I like that design, go with it, you can, so that timeline is really driven by how long you wanna talk and work out the details and all this stuff. Or are you gonna say, this is generally what we want architect, go to it, right? So, the city council and the community center, committee are gonna dictate which one of these two timelines you're going to use, so the control is in your own hands.
Mayor Calvin.
You know, Brian, it's just a really good timeline and everything that gets put in front of us here. And I agree with Councilmember Osmus that the tighter timeline really, I mean, I think that's what the community is asking us to do. There is some advantage to the looser time frame as you have it marked, because that then allows us to receive additional revenues from the local option sales tax dollars. Although the majority of these funds are gonna come not out of the local option sales tax dollars, but other sources. But I like the tighter time frame, and I think that one of the things with timeline is, and I think it's pretty consistent. We haven't met since August, and now we are in December, which is a substantial amount of time, but we were waiting for a lot of the other moving parts to happen.
And the tours.
And the tours to happen, right? So, it wasn't that we weren't doing work, it was just that we weren't physically meeting in a formal sense at City Hall. So the informal meetings were still happening. So I like the tighter timeline. I think that our constituents are looking forward to it at this point, and they want us to be responsible. And I think that when we start talking about how do we want to consider the RFPs and all of these things, some of that then is going to, those self-controls are going to be put in place, because if we set and say that, similar to some other projects that we've done, once we select that construction manager at risk and the architect, if we then collaborate with staff and have staff take the majority of the lead, these projects can move much faster. And so, I think either one can be done. It's just, what does the group wish to do, and I prefer the tighter timeline personally.
Administrator Brown.
In reviewing the current RFPs for architect for like the event center, they've all basically said, sort of the same flow of the timeline, they've all said that timeline works. And then they caveat it, as long as you don't drag your feet, So that's all I'm saying, is the tighter timeline works, but if things start getting slowed down, all I'm saying is be prepared that another timeline does work. And it still works, it's not the end of the world, so if for some reason it gets bogged down due to whatever reason, it still can happen. So everything I'm seeing on the RFPs is like, the event center, that'll work. That's good design time, good construction time. We can make that work. Unless unless an unknown pops up, unless people don't make decisions fast enough, unless when we bring options to you, and you take 2 months to decide on the options.
Well noted.
Yes.
Right, task force?
Yes,
Well
yes.
noted, all right.
Hammered home.
Mayor Calvin,
You know, I think, you know, with
Was it
that,
too hard?
with that in mind, you know, we may, once we get into this time frame of getting the RFPs opened and selected, we may want to go to having more frequent meetings, like maybe twice a month. Just simply so that if there's not a decision to be made, we just cancel the meeting. But we just get it on everybody's calendar that, just understand, you know, you need to be here, you know, we're gonna be making decisions. Yeah, so, yeah.
yeah, we need to have regularly scheduled meetings.
Right.
I will ask on the, December 16th, the city council authorized advertising of the RFPs and approve the timeline. We do have, approval for the RFPs on the September 3rd meeting, for both the construction manager at risk and also the architect. So is there a need to take that to the city council on the 16th, or can we move things ahead?
I couldn't remember that far back.
You said September.
So
The September
yeah, the
3rd.
September
Yeah,
minutes.
Janelle was kind enough to find us the minutes that.
That right?
That's right,
All
there
right,
it is,
then we're
Ryan.
good.
We
Then
know
we don't
it.
have to take them, we don't have to take it
Okay,
back.
So then does that tighten up our, I mean, if we approve it today, if we have the authority, does that,
Yeah,
does that,
well,
does
that-
that move that ahead 2
It
weeks?
moves it, yeah, and it can move it up.
we still have Christmas and
I know.
New Year's, so do.
This is
I mean,
just a
it might
tough time
just
of the
be-
year.
It's a crazy time of year,
It might just be nice to leave it, but advertise it immediately, but give them that much
Yeah.
time to be able
Yeah.
to still submit it, but
Or do we just jump it a week
even 1 week, I'm,
to January 7th?
I kinda like,
January 7th is so close to the 1st.
Councilmember Alvarado.
I think, I kinda like the timeline as it is. These choppy weeks, people are doing this and that personally, and then they can be working on it, obviously, but they come in after the first of the year, I have a week, we might not get the best product. I kinda agree with the current timeline to go into the 14th personally, but I'll go along with that majority.
Mayor Calvin.
You know, I've done, I don't know how many hundreds of RFPs I've done over the years, and you get all the phone calls the week before. So, you know, we found it with the ones we just did. You know, we didn't hear anything, we had that whole dead space when nothing got done. But, you know, the week before, all of a sudden you start getting the phone calls, well, give me clarification here, give me clarification here. So, if you do that on the 14th, you'll get those phone calls the week before. If you do it on the 7th, you'll get the phone calls the week before. If you do it on December 30th, you'll get them the week before. Because, you know, these guys all have boilerplates. You know, I respectfully disagree a tad bit there. But, you know, if we're talking a week and a week's gonna get us all jacked up, it's better to be safe than to get jacked up, without a doubt. So. But understand, they're not gonna work on them until the week, you know, the week before anyways, probably, you know. So,
So what is the task force's inclination?
if you're in the 14th, that's it, right?
Okay.
Stay with the way it is.
Alright.
So,
With moving to December 16th out, right?
Consider that accomplished.
correct.
Okay, very good. I would note that I also prefer the shorter version A for the timeline. If we could refer to that in our RFP, I would be all over that.
It's gonna be listed in, the timeline will be listed in the RFP. And what's interesting is you list the timeline in the RFP, and then after the proposals are in, is, you know, can verify, they call up and say, "Well, can you tell me when you're going to do that?" It was in there. And But yeah, it'll be there.
Okay, any other thoughts or items in regard to the timeline?
Want a motion to accept that timeline?
I'll accept the motion. Was that your motion to accept the timeline?
Well, I made the last motion, I don't want to.
I'll make a motion to accept that timeline.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. And that motion passes. Thank you. All right. So I'm gonna hand it back to you again, Administrator Gromans, to walk through the RFP for consideration of the construction manager at risk.
All right, this is basically the same format that we used prior to. The only change I made to the format was the scoring document, which is found on page 12. And there was sort of an ambiguous description in paragraph 5.2. There was an additional line in there, and it kind of had to do with project approach, and it seemed like it was redundant, so I just actually changed it to actually what the RFP said. There was one where you had, I took 2 or 3 different evaluation categories and tried to come up with a score, and I went, well, that's crazy, you've got your evaluation, categories, let's just go with that. So this one just has one less evaluation category, and so the points were redistributed through the rest of them to sort of come up with 100. You'll see under 5.3, that's where the some of the timeline information that we just approved will go into. There's other locations within the document that it goes into. And the only other thing that I would look at, and that is the cost sheet. Why I'm not seeing it. No, I think I did.
Final page, I think.
It was actually the architect one that was different, that I changed a little bit, but the construction manager, I changed way down in the bottom in the middle where it says lump sum or percent. I think this is like LS, and I think some people didn't know what LS stood for, and so I just try to clarify where I can. So this really, in essence, is 99.9% minus the timeline, the same as we had used before. So nothing surprising in here that was really changed. So,
Any questions or comments? Mayor Calvin?
On page 12, under the safety program, when we talked about that at the local option sales tax meeting, we talked about increasing that, but then we ended up leaving it the same. Are you comfortable with leaving it the same? I mean, now you've had an opportunity to review a number of RFPs that have come in, and is that weighted correctly, or should it be lowered? Or maybe increased?
I think the safety program is going to be, a description of their process. Do they do weekly tailgate safety meetings? Do they have somebody on site? That's part of it, and that's why it's here. But it's not the most important part
Correct.
of this.
Right, right,
So
that's why I'm asking.
I think it's where it should be. Safety is always important, but the construction, how are you gonna put the project together, is it gonna be built upside down, is way more important at that point in time. Is it gonna be built correctly? Do you know what you're doing? So I would say it's adequate. But, if you wanna change it to 10 points and take 5 away from B, I mean, that's fine too. I'm not hung up on anything. it's just, the safety is an important part, but it's such a small part of the whole project that construction manager's gonna do. You know, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of like saying, we're all gonna sit around here and my pen is important. Well, I can have another pen, but, so this one pen is important, but it's not the end all to the whole project here. And that's where the construction manager, when I look at it, it's important. And it has to be recognized. How are you gonna deal with it? How are you gonna deal with safety? How often? Who's gonna be on site? Are you gonna contract with it outside of your organization, or do you have somebody inside your organization that is important? You know, that's important information to have. But I would say it's worth, you know, 5 points.
And so, just to follow up to that, you know, knowing how the last one scored, because that was made available to the council. I wasn't thinking of going up, I was actually thinking of going down. I mean, I agree with you that safety is important, but what we saw in the RFPs is that each of them, you know, responded that they do have safety programs, it's just a different way in how they manage those safety programs. So I'm fine with leaving it, I just wanted to make sure that we properly vetted that piece. But I know Councilmember Alvarado, safety is very important to you, as you've talked numerous times.
Right.
You know, you never undermine safety. And so, so it probably is fine to leave it in there. I was just wondering.
Councilman Rasmus, did you have?
I did, on page 3, and just a little bit of what the project would entail. Did we solidly say that we had to supply a space for Mid-Minnesota Development Commission because of a contract with them? Oh.
What does that say?
Here he
It says
comes.
remove.
It says remove.
Okay.
It doesn't say remove the space.
Back to here.
It
Yes.
removes the name.
Got it.
The decision whether or not you want to
Okay.
or not is a future decision based on economics and other considerations. But after I got all this thing and I had it all cranked out and sent out, I went, I don't like the name being in there. We're not, let's just say we're gonna have space.
Has there been any conversation with them?
I have not taken any time, I don't know.
Mid-Minnesota Development Commission, and whether or not we're gonna include them in the plans for the new city hall.
Are they interested in locating in the new city hall?
I think they're interested.
Cost?
I'm sure that'll be in all the negotiation parts, but I think that they thought they would be considered as a tenant if we were relocating. I don't know if that's an expectation, but they are aware that that's completely up to whatever the council does with the design.
I thought the only discussion we'd had is they wanted to get out of the basement.
Right.
I was gonna say that, because they did say that they prefer not to be in the basement.
Basement dwellings anyway.
So to leave our options open, it's in here, but
Okay.
I wanted to take Mid-Minnesota Development Commission out, and at some future date, a decision would be either, yes, we're gonna do that, or no, we're not gonna have that extra 3,000 square feet available.
And anything else you removed before I call you out?
I think that was the only thing.
Anything more, Councilmember Rasmus?
In dates. Yeah, I think that really was the only thing that I came across. Yep.
I just have a question on the preliminary budget. It's estimated at 10 million. And this is the first time that I think we're seeing a solid number. But last night at the council, we approved 8.5 for the city hall project and the community center being together. We understand there's another 2 million outside of that, so that would put it at 10.5 million. But we really haven't had that conversation.
Administrator.
The only reason I reduced the 500,000 was because we're not buying land.
Oh,
When we were looking downtown here, there was a cost for the land.
sure.
And I said, since we're not buying land, realistically, you could take that $500,000 land purchase out of the deals, because you're still left with the building and all that, so you can make it 10-5, I have no problem with that. I just looked at your original budget, threw in the 2 million community center, and then subtracted out the land purchase.
Councilman Rasmus.
What's going to be our cost, for the, construction manager at risk? And what's our soft cost in it? If we're at 10 million,
We
Well-
don't officially know that till our RFP comes in, but.
You're gonna say
Okay.
your construction costs, you know,
Okay,
let's say your
what
construction
percentage?
costs
Okay.
are $9 million, right? And so then you've got your architect and your construction manager, they were coming in at, let's just say 3% for the construction manager, but also had, like 5% in reimbursables and other costs. So, like the local option sales tax projects, that came in at like $1.6 million, of which only like 500,000 is actual construction manager, the rest is reimbursable. Now, we may not have to pay that, because if we don't use that, we don't pay for that. But, you could basically say 3% with construction manager. And what I'm seeing in architects, that's right in that anywhere from 6 to 7.5%, for the architect. So you're talking, 10-11% potentially just for the architect. That's why you had a $10 million project, and 10% is those two items. You're down to $9 million actual construction cost.
I was just thinking if we were trying to just keep it at 10 million, that 500,000 then would cover it.
Yeah, doesn't quite cover it.
No.
Does the total cost of 10 million include furniture? Or is that over and above?
No. It's not, it's,
So that would leave
it's,
that.
it can include furniture, that's your decision.
Councilmember Meske.
I want to get back to the mayor's comment, because my understanding is a little bit different. I thought the $8.5 million was the total on the project that included the $2 million from local option sales tax. This is now a $10.5 million, and it sounded as if, correct me if I'm wrong, that we said, well, the 8.5 did include now the $2 million in the local option sales tax, and so we've added that onto it to make it 10.5. It was my understanding, people correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that when we said 8.5 million, that included the 2 million from the local option sales tax.
I think there was a conversation that happened at a previous meeting where we thought that that number had to increase based on what they had done on the site visits, and the dollars that they saw there. And I thought it was talked about once before.
That's definitely never been talked about, definitely at a council level, and that's your point.
Right, that's my point.
Exactly. Because that does change it. I've watched the price tag of the project continue to blossom and grow, and we have to be prepared to define exactly what that means and why that number has continued to blossom and grow. Because as I've just said here, that's a new number to me, and as it continues to blossom, it may become less palatable, but I will continue to listen and engage with that.
The number that was my understanding, that when you were talking City Hall, it was 8.5 million. And then when you did the local option sales tax, 2 million of that was available for the community center, because they were two separate projects, they could have been. City Hall downtown, community center maybe out there, and when you bring the two together, discussions with staff said, it probably, it's gonna go together. And then when you look at 2 million, what you get for $1 million with the Four Seasons shelter, and then you look at what you're gonna get for $2 million for the community center, 2 million is not enough, I think, to get what they are asking for. So the community center, I believe, is gonna be closer to $4 million if you separated that out. which then leaves $6.5 million for the city hall, and the one city hall we got a really great city hall for $10 million. Just your city hall was $10 million. So I'm sitting there going, if you say, well, those $8.5 million was for both facilities, I'm curious to see what you can get for that much space for $8.5 million.
Right, and I must have missed one of those conversations, but, I mean, I can remember the $2 million that was put in for the community center local option sales tax. We knew that was not enough. That was to renovate that existing facility to bring it up to standard. That was the number that was floated out in the study. So we estimated that would probably be 4. And then at the time, we had put an earmark of $4.5 million, perhaps for a city hall, which gave us $8.5. Is my recollection of how that went.
That's right.
Okay, and so now I'm seeing now it's,
We can change that.
I just
Strike of the
wanted,
pen.
I just wanted to let you know,
You're correct.
I'm
You're
picking-
tracking 100%.
Okay, because now it's at 10.5, and so as we went to other facilities, we realized that perhaps 8.5 is not going to be getting us what is the going rate for a combined city hall community center.
If we remember when we toured Carver, that was a $5 million building. And that was far smaller than what we would ever imagine, so, yeah.
So I mean, I guess when it comes down to it, it's gonna be how we're gonna finance that, and what we can afford.
Maybe we can ask our finance director, because he would have been at the meetings with the finance committee. What was their understanding of the 8.5 they approved last night? Was that inclusive?
That was not inclusive of the 2 million as far as I understand, 2 million was in addition to that for the local option sales tax portion.
Because I was not at the first meeting, the second meeting, that wasn't talked about. So
The 8.5 million was a city hall
was the
in the
city
capital
contribution.
improvement.
That's what I thought we talked about when
In the
the three of
budget
us put
process.
the budget together.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that carried through.
I was gonna ask that question last night, so just if I'm hearing correctly, because last night I noticed that 8.5 million came up and it said City Hall. It didn't have a / community center, so are we suggesting that 8.5 is now considered City Hall and 2 million is the community center?
That's not how I put the number.
Okay.
The city hall, community center, the construction manager and the architect is both facilities, $10 million. Now, if you want to increase it to 10.5, that's fine, that's just ink on paper.
When I prepared the budget to submit to the council, it was considered for City Hall and Community Center. Exactly what, Mr. Wilkins has said, and then we have that additional influx. That might have just been a type of thing, but it should have been inclusive, I believe, correct? In your conversations?
So, what is the direction for the dollar amount to be included in the RFP? Is it 10 million or 10.5 million? Councilmember Osmus.
I think we try to keep the building part at 10 million, unless for the whole, I don't know, but the contingency for the furniture, we're gonna have to include that sometime, somewhere. So, in the RFP, we don't need to put the extra 500,000 in there, but for financing, we would need the 10.5. Is how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, and just as an FYI, the community center, $2 million of local option sales tax, by statute. There's a gray line in there somewhere, but by statute, it's actually for capital. That means building, roof, sidewalk, doors, whatever. And they don't expect you to spend that $2 million in the community center for tables and chairs and that sort of thing. So that would be on top. But because your community center is, let's say it's $2 million of local option sales tax for the capital expenditure for the structure, and you're putting another $2 million in possibly, thereabouts, that's where the furniture can come out of. That fund is no problem, you can buy chairs and, if you had a $4 million community center. So you can get by doing it this way, but many of the other facilities that are using local option sales tax, there's certain things you cannot buy with it because it's not a structure, it's not concrete, it's not walls, it's not glass.
Are there any other thoughts or comments in regard to the RFP for the construction manager at risk?
There are some typos, but I might just staff will take care of the typos.
What? Do you,
Janelle has them.
I'm from Missouri, show me.
did you catch that? This is the only one I caught. Did you catch the extra space here? The extra period?
In some names and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Janelle has it.
So this is really petty, but I hate to see us paying for cell phone for folks. And I would rather not offer that up as an item for them to include. If they should come up with it, fine, but everybody has a cell phone. That's really petty.
They're gonna charge you in one way.
All right.
Cause you know that, the profit and overhead, cell phones are overhead, just like the copier is, just, they're charging the stuff out.
All right. My 2 cents. Okay, are we ready to move on then to the RFP for the architect? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. As a task force, we are actually doing motions.
I don't know if we are, but we started.
So we might as well. Yes, I'll accept a motion to approve the request for proposal with the changes as identified.
I'll make that motion.
A motion, is there a second?
You gonna second it? Want me?
I'm late to the game.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion or concern in regard to the RFP?
My concerns are late in the game. The scope of the project, the size of the project, I may have additional questions about, but the process, I don't have questions about. This is obviously the next step in the process. My questions are knitted in the so.
Councilmember Alvarado?
Should we, with the 2.2 preliminary project estimate, should we break that 10 million into the two pieces that we're intending it, or not? Or just,
I wouldn't.
not, you wouldn't? Okay.
If you're looking at this as it's a complex, one construction project,
Cause I think there's gonna be shared space.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Right, right.
As the city council or the task force committee, you'll make a decision whether it's 3.5 for the community center or, 7 for the city hall. You'll make that decision as you talk to the architect and work out the split, what it's gonna take to build that facility, what it's gonna take to build that. But the total dollar figure that we have available that we want to spend is maximum
Okay.
for this project.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Meske?
Just a question. I see this in an order of action, 5 through 7. My question is, for me, who has some sticker shock going on, number 7 seems relevant for me in addressing 5 and 6. Because if it makes sense on how it is to be paid for, and it seems palatable, I'm much more amenable to how we set out the contracts, because otherwise, doing this route, if I don't like number 7, I've already approved the financing and setting out for a bit of the construction management architect. If you follow where I'm tracking.
Mr. Mayor?
One of the things that happened is we're kind of following the same format that we followed. I think Mr. Grumman is following the same format that we followed with the local option sales tax projects, and I think that might be the reason the agenda is prepared the way it is.
The local sales tax, we knew the number, and we knew how that money was coming in before we did the other steps. We knew it was the $30 million.
That's fair. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. But we just didn't know how we were gonna finance it. if we're gonna sell bonds or take money
Right.
internally or
Yep.
combination of both, and that was discussed at those meetings.
Right, because I mean, I don't wanna disrupt things, but if we're gonna know what our annual payback is if we're to do this, and that's gonna be, well, with 10 million now, what that annual payback is that's a sustainable compartment of our future budgets is a concern for me, that we can actually make that payment, because that, as that number gets larger, the payback number will get larger as well. And is that something that we can put into a budget that is sustainable? Because it's gonna have to not include one-time dollars and those kinds of things, so.
Administrative balance.
Yeah, I think, Steve may have a comment, or he may not. But the case may be that, as I understood it, you got your $10 million project, you take 2 out because you already have the funding source for that, took off your sales tax. You're left with the 8, and I thought our debt service was based off of $8.5 million, what it was going to be on an annual basis.
Yeah, and
So
I'll
we
go
already
back,
have a number.
I'll go back to the 18 budget process when the mayor gave us instructions for basically 3 projects at that time, and that was the City Hall, Community Center project, the storm sewer of 2 million, and the ice plant of 2.8. The ice plant we've done through a bonding process. The storm sewer, I think needs to be clarified yet. I believe that's been funded now through the local option sales tax, so that leaves the $8.5 million. And he had put in the 18 budget $840,000 of an annual debt service for a 25 to 30 year useful life. So if you reduce that, that was funding the whole 13.3 million. Reduce that to only the 8.5 million, it's about $530,000 annual debt service for that 25 to 30 year life, if it's totally funded through bonds.
There's the question, 530,000, is that a sustainable number that we can continue to finance?
And as you remember last night, 147,000 is 1 mil.
Right.
So divide that into 500-some thousand, and that's what your tax levy would have to go up just to do that. So if you use some savings to reduce that debt, then that number would go down.
Worst case scenario, the increase of the levy then to cover this would be approximately how much?
3,
3.5
3,
mils,
yeah,
3 and 3/4 mils.
3.5%, 3.5 mils.
Okay. That would be in addition to any natural increase you'd be using
Yeah.
for the rest of the city's function.
Yep.
Okay.
Unless you use.
I understand buying down of reserve,
No.
that's why I say,
But that's your
I want
decision.
worst case scenario,
That's
and not
council.
using our reserves of other things.
Right.
But what are we actually talking about as far as if we had to finance this all on taxpayer dollars? I'm not suggesting we do it, but that's the worst case scenario, and we're looking at probably a 3.5% increase on a levy at some point.
Well,
Mayor.
One of the things you need to remember is, so if you looked at that chart that the finance director and the
Yeah.
finance committee presented, you're looking at about an increase of about 360 to 370,000 of additional revenues coming in through additional development, additional valuation of properties, those types of things. So you have those dollars. One of the things that was done last night is you used some of the 2019 capital, which that hasn't been done in the past. And so you have to understand that that's gonna have to be taken out of, so next year, normally you'd have that amount of money available to use. So usually you wait until 2 years for it to drop off. This time you dropped it off in 1 year, which is fine. Council has the authority to do that. But, so you need to understand that, there's some action last night too that may affect what you have to do, but, when we looked at the budget piece, I think I'm correct, am I wrong?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay.
That's,
So when you look at the budget piece, I think it's important to point out that this could be 3.5 points on the levy. But in reality, if we're doing some of the cost containments that we're hoping we're doing by some of the changes we made within the last 2 months of the council, which have been very proactive financially for the city, hopefully some of those savings will be passed on and realize our savings. So,
If I could just expand on that, Mr. Mayor, you're perfectly correct. And depending on how you structure the debt service, that 500 and some thousand was a flat debt service for that 25 to 30-year life. You can structure it so that you can balloon that payment as you go up, as your city grows, then you could possibly absorb that through that growth and increase tax base. It's a possibility.
I like that possibility.
Are you comfortable with the vote in regard to the motion that's on the table?
I'm getting more comfortable with it, yes.
All right. Given that, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
I,
Any opposed, same sign. And that motion carries. All right.
Madam Chair, maybe we should talk financing options next rather than
Sure.
out of consideration, Councilman Nestor.
Call upon you, Finance Director Okins.
Again, we have done some preliminary contact with our bonding consultants, and I believe that letter, which is a couple years old, has been distributed. We have also talked to them again, and are analyzing not only the debt service that this would occur, but the local option sales tax. And some of the discussion has been preliminary in nature because of two factors. We have the timeline, which will have an impact of how much we issue for debt, and then the amount that we need, especially like in the local option sales tax, that's been just preliminary discussed at $10 million a year for the next 3 years, but I think that's being accelerated. And I think that we're looking at probably bonding for that probably in 2 years rather than 3. And so once those decisions are made, as well as the decisions for this, that will fit into our debt service. And as I mentioned, structuring the debt is a big part of that discussion about fitting that annual debt service payment into what the council is comfortable with. And then the discussion, and I don't know if there's been discussion yet, about possible reserves or the community investment fund, which is a fund that was established in 1990 for projects like this. There are criteria in the codification of the ordinances and the municipal code that the council has to follow. And I don't believe that was included for today's meeting, but should be, so that the committee can look at that and see what those restrictions are. The main one, I think it meets all of them except the main one, where you have to, before you hold a public meeting, determine what the projected annual operating costs are going to be moving forward. And that needs to be included in a public hearing. So we are in contact with our bond people, and we are using the $8.5 million for the city hall at this point because of the discussion that took place for the 18 budget, and $2 million for the community center. So a total of 10.5 now. But again, the timing on the local option sales tax has a large impact on how much that we go out to borrow for. And our projections for the $250,000 a month are, in reviewing the county numbers, are going to be pretty close, if not conservative in nature, for the local option sales tax portion.
What are bond rates today?
The rates have, matter of fact, the feds are even predicting another 0.25% reduction in Fed fund rates. And so rates are very favorable. I'd have to check currently. They're about.
County just sold last month for 1.8.
And that's probably 1.5 to 1.8.
Not net fees. Net fees was higher than that, but.
And again, it depends on if it's straight revenue bonds, it's usually a 1/4 basis point higher than geo-backed bonds. And the local option sales tax will be revenue bonds, so. And if we place it locally, we've had conversations with some local lending institutions, and they're very willing to have those discussions. And so that would have an impact as well, if you want to place it locally.
Mayor Calvin?
I believe Sean was.
Oh,
Have you ran numbers if we do accelerate some of the local option sales pieces and move some of that towards this of what that's gonna look like for debt service?
We have not. We certainly can. Again, some decisions have to be made, especially like on the local option sales tax. I think the timelines have just been kind of finalized because of the construction manager has a timeline in their proposal. So we're going to be working with that timeline in mind.
Yeah, cause it feels, it's almost like some of these decisions on this, because the financing of this can affect local option sales tax projects and vice versa.
I don't know if that would be the case because the local option sales tax is we have a pretty steady revenue stream for that, and so.
What are the rules on how much we can bond and take on?
Well, 33 million, or it's 3% of your estimated market value, and that's only if it's geo-backed. But revenue bonds and those other types of financings, there is really no limit. But if it's just strictly geo-backed, then the city has no bonds that are strictly geo-backed.
There's an informal bank qualified limitation,
Of 10 million annually.
10 million.
Yeah.
And all that means is basically that if you only bond for 10 million or less in any year, then smaller banks can buy that debt. And as soon as you go over 10 million, it becomes less likely that they're gonna be interested because of the tax implications on their buying them and their revenue. Now they gotta pay tax on their revenue. So then the bigger banks come into play, the New York, the Chicagos, the whatever, and they're gonna charge you more interest. That's where they're making their money. Okay, so it's an artificial, there's no limit that, you can't do this. It's just that if it's under this, this is the way it is, and if it's over this is the way it is. So you just know it going in, but we're anticipating of going through that 10 million limit.
Yeah.
So that the point is really moot.
In the next 2 to 3 years, depending on the schedules that the council decides on. And in the last couple of years, we've placed our financing locally and have not had a rating from the rating agency. Again, that may have an effect on the rating, which would have a small effect on the rates. But again, as Councilman Schwantes asked, I mean, right now the rates, and again, they're projecting another 0.25% decline in the Fed fund rates. I don't think we'll get to like Europe where they're negative. But again, impact, if you compare 2020 to 2016 in an election year, we saw a similar movement on the rates. And so we anticipate possibly that being in effect again after the first of the year.
Are there any other questions in regard to financing?
So I just wanted to kind of put this in context. The 2018 number, didn't we have that at 3%? Do you remember what it was?
It was higher than where it is today, you're correct. I don't remember what the rate was, and I'm
I
looking
thought
at.
it was right around 3% because, so we went actually higher than what was being sold at that time, as I recall.
Yeah.
Just to kind of give ourselves a little bit. And then we did it net fees rather than, so we not only included the bond rating, the bond we had to pay, the percentage we had to pay, but then we included the fees in it also, didn't we, Steve?
Yes, and I don't know if the schedules were included in your information, but I do have them here, and that was 3.3.
Right. So I mean, so if you take a look, that, I think Candido County sold it at 1.8, I think that's what Larry told me, or right around 1.8, and then with fees, just a tad over 2. So just as a comparison. So if you take, I mean, that debt service, if you drop it, just say you drop it 1 point, you're gonna save a lot of money.
And the local option sales tax portion has a maximum maturity of 13 years
Right.
because of the length of the local option sales tax. So we anticipate that probably be able to be retired shorter than those 13 years just based on the revenues that are coming in.
Any other questions or concerns in regard to financing? Hearing none, let's move on to the consideration of the RFP for the architect.
Page 3 has the same correction. And I might just note that I think the insurance requirements that this version has, I think that will need to be adjusted. I think, Robert, we did it for the last architect one, so I think we need to increase it, where it says $2 million, supposed to be $4 million, because we're matching the Minnesota City's insurance trust numbers, so that we're protected.
On page 10.
Yeah, it starts on 9, goes to 10. I'm pretty sure that commercial general liability is actually supposed to be $4 million. But I'll put those in as Robert had instructed the last go round. And then I'll insert the timeline in this document as we described earlier.
I'd entertain a motion to approve that.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, further discussion. I'd like to look at the evaluation criteria. I don't know if you wanted to have consistency from the RFP for the construction manager at risk. Item A is different on both line items, but the maximum points are different. And so I don't know if we wanted to have some consistency from one evaluation to the other.
Well, the construction manager is more prone to boots on the ground, and that's why they have safety. They're in charge of the safety on the construction site. The architect is not really in charge of the safety. They show up once a week or once every 2 weeks.
The firm experience on one is at 30 and the other 35, project team is 20, the other is 15, project proposal is 30, others 35, fees and
Yeah.
attachment. So I just wanted to make note of that and see if there was a reason for it.
Well, realistically, you know, when you look at like the compensation, somewhere here. The architect was reduced, not reduced, but the architect was set at 10 for the fee and compensation because normally that really is, it's an important factor, but that's not why you hire an architect. You know, you hire the architect for the ability, the artistic, the design, the flow, and so that's why you're seeing like their experience in building these kind of, designing these kind of facilities. I put more emphasis on that. I put more emphasis on their project, their project approach. Construction project approach is different than design project approach. The design part is coming and talking to the review teams, the committees, the task force, the citizen groups to say, what do you want in your community center? That's different than put footing in ground, put 2x4 on top of footing, put, you know, how you approach your project. So they're really two separate sort of things. They interact differently, and I put different emphasis on it.
Okay, I can respect that, thank you. Mayor Council.
I want to agree 100% with what Brian said on that, and so when I saw this, it did cause me alarm. Because really, here is where you're getting your artistic approach and what you want the building to feel like, what you want to look like, what are some key features. And so the firm experience will come into play on that one. And then on the approach is, how do they approach the building? And, you know, I mean, in one of the meetings that we had early on when we were talking, and Dr. Ramsden was with us, one of the things that he said is, you know, you really want that building to just have a feel. You want it to have a Wilmer feel. And so that's what I look at as the project approach, so I'm totally comfortable with the changes that were made in the scoring piece.
I appreciate that, I just wanted to make sure that it hadn't been a template that
Yep.
we hadn't given consideration to, and so, very good.
Method to the madness.
Very good, thank you. Councilmember Miss.
So on that page, of course, maybe pointed this out, but we are at the city of New Ulm on page 13.
Wow, where did
Yeah.
I fit?
I mean, I do appreciate that the plagiarism did come from the city of New Ulm. But,
Actually, because the insurance numbers aren't correct, this is probably not the latest version, where I spell checked and said, where's all the New Ulms? And I pulled it out.
so,
It's also on page.
I think Sean,
all
Sean
right,
caught
that's why I didn't
that.
count one of them. So, I'm just,
Councilmember Muskie, continue.
So when we do the evaluation of the architects, is the
Yeah.
expectation that we are already going to have some of that artistic stuff in that presentation portion, so we can evaluate that? How does that process work?
Normally in the process, what you'll have is, I mean, they'll be responding and say, these are similar projects that we've done, and this is kind of our portfolio, and this is the flair that we have. And so when the selection group, whether that be simply staff that whittles it down, because I'm guessing on this type of a response, we're gonna have a dozen plus architects that'll be responding. And so we'll just have a manageable piece that we'll look at, but, so it'll be the flair that we wanna look at, so you'll see some of that. But then when you get into building it, that's where you're gonna put that actual, you know, what I'll call the Wilmer emphasis, if you will. But, yeah, you'll see some of that. I mean, like when we were up to League of Minnesota Cities Conference, you could go to some of the tables and look at the work that they had done, and you'd look at it and you'd go, holy buckets, I really like this style. You'd go to another one and you'd say, I'm not even gonna pick up their brochure because I'm not even interested in their style. And so you see some of that in their brochures, and, you know, and when they build a certain way, they build a certain way. And, you know, they can adjust to it, but, you know, if you come and say that you want, I'm not even gonna say it. If you want something in particular that they don't even do, when you visit with them, they'll just say, well, we're not even interested in the project. So, because they have their flair, so you'll see that. At least that's been my experience in the past.
Yeah, I'm going through the RFPs for the event center right now, and they'll show examples of what they've done before. And so if we're sitting there looking at trying to construct an event center, and they're showing us dental offices, it's probably not a good fix, even though, you know, you look at, oh, that's a really nice dental office, you know, it's really got a nice artistic flair to it. That's not what we're after. So their documents, when they submit it, some are pretty apparent that their segment of the world is baseball diamonds, and this guy's over here is convention centers, and this firm over here does hockey arenas, you know. And so it's kind of interesting to analyze their artistic ability based off of what they provide us.
And just one more,
Councilmember Miskey.
when we do this portion, I know this committee has gone out and looked at many sites. Maybe haven't articulated exactly what it would look like to be a Wilmerized kind of a facility, but we're getting better at that. When you see these, I know staff will probably make some of these evaluations. Is it the intent before the final architect is chosen that maybe some of those would come back to make sure that we are congruent in what we're looking at?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to a group of, a smaller group to review. It doesn't have to just be staff. It can be whoever you want to review. Like with the local option sales tax, we've got the Swanson Field Group looking at their architect. We've got the recreation field looking at theirs, and the event center maybe couldn't rally the troops, and it's just staff doing that one. And so we'll boil it down to 2 or 3, whatever we come up with, and then that then goes in front of the reinvest in Wilmer Group.
Sure.
And then they'll interview, and they'll make a recommendation to council. So the same thing would apply here, is that we'll boil it down, a group will boil it down, that will be recommended to interview 2 or 3 architects, and then the council chooses from there.
Sure.
But it's whatever process the council wants. Nothing's cut in stone.
Any final comments in regard to the
Do you want to decide
RFP
on
for
that
the
group
architect?
at this time? I'll make a motion that we accept
Yeah,
it.
motion to table.
Oh, sorry.
I would just note the numbering of items, and that might have been pointed out already, are inconsistent throughout the document, so just to check that along with the numbers that are within the paragraphs. Okay, any further discussion? All right, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign, and that motion carries. Anything else for the good of the order? Councilman, Mayor Calhoun.
One of the things that maybe we might want to consider, of the council members, present, is that you want to sit in on the scoring, or the selection of the final 2 or 3 to come back to you? Or do you just want staff to do that? I mean, if you have staff do that, that's gonna streamline the process. And, I mean, your staff has already sat in and heard what you wanted, when you went on your tours. So the staff has a pretty good handle, and then this group make that final recommendation to bring to council? Or do you wanna have a subset? It will streamline it if you have staff do it, and make the process go faster, but it's up to the council what they wish to do. Or what this committee is.
What is the wish of the committee task force, and I would also note that we need to consider the community center's thoughts as well.
Correct, but they can be for the final 3.
I guess I thought that's how we were going to do it. So that was my comments about when we do get a few architects come back, then we'd reconvene and have a larger group look at that. I'm fully on board with that kind of an idea.
I have no desire to review that. I have no desire to review 16. I have a desire to review 3.
All right,
What are the other members think?
I agree.
I like the streamline idea. I think there's a desire to get this thing moving greatly. I know that we just want to make sure that we give the public their due, that's all. But I agree with, let's keep this moving, that's what we've been charged with.
very good. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts in regard to the City Hall task force?
I have one question, and it's for clarification purposes. I know the mayor and I have had a conversation about this, but I really need it to come from this group. And that is, with the local option sales tax, original 3 projects, we did by invitation for the construction manager. And I'm asking, the alternative is to advertise it like we did the architects, and get people who do construction management, in greater Minnesota or South Dakota or wherever. So I just need direction on this. Are you thinking that construction management would be by invitation only again in Wilmer, or are we going out? Because I'm assuming the architect, we're going out like we did with all the others, so just say, advertise it in the construction bulletins and all the various places that people look for it. I just want to know, I want verification on the construction manager.
Mayor Calhoun?
You know, I feel very strongly about this, that we need to really open it up. I mean, this is, you know, we kind of told and said we were going to do it with the local option sales tax projects. This project is bigger than that. I think we need to make sure that we notify our 3 local firms, you know, maybe, you know, make sure they get it, or make sure they're aware of it. But I think we need to go in the open market. I think we need to go in the open market just to get an idea. Our local people maybe being, and I don't know this, I don't wanna speak for them, but they got a lot on their plate right now with our projects that we just brought to them. And so to add something else onto their plate might be something that may put them at an overload situation, which the cost then may be reflected. I think we need to do, in talking about what we talked about collaboratively today, is that we need to do cost containment as much as we can, and if we can get a good project and we can do it and go into the open market, I think we need to do the open market. That's
Other
my personal
members,
opinion.
comments, thoughts? Councilmember Osmus?
I guess my thought would be is if we stayed local, then, their availability is easier, and that they would be on site more often, they would have more of a thumb on it. Where if somebody's, an hour or 2 hours away, they're not gonna be as on top of it as somebody local. That's my thought.
Councilmember Miskey?
What were the reasons for keeping it by invitation only with World Walking Series?
It was, I don't know if anybody else wants to comment, but I'll comment on what I heard sitting at the
Right.
table, is that they have invested in our community, they pay taxes in our community, they've helped with a number of different projects in our community, and we wanted it locally, we wanted those dollars to stay local. It's kind of it, why we
Sure.
did it. I'm not saying that any of those are not valid, but the thing of it is, if we open it up, they still have the opportunity to bid it like anybody else. We're not excluding them. It's just that, when Brian and I visited about this probably a month ago or so, we could have saved maybe 1%, or more even, if we would have went to a larger pool.
Councilmember Alvarado?
Thank you. I agree with the mayor, I think we should open it up. I think we can put parameters on our contract with whomever we deal with, that if we want them there Monday through Friday or whatever, we can build that in or require them to be there, so. Capitalism is competition, so we probably should, it might help us save some money, I don't think, so.
Do we have any of those in this proposal? Any of those parameters that you're speaking of, that we've already approved?
I'm just gonna tell you, if there's construction going on, the construction manager's gonna be on site. No matter where his house is, he'll be here. Because the construction manager is, in essence, responsible for everything. And when we assign the construction manager the contracts, he is assuring us that he will build it for this dollar. And technically, if costs go over, he has to eat those. Unless there's a change order, and sometimes change orders happens. But the bottom line is, he is in 100% control. He's not gonna come in on Tuesday afternoon and let him work on Monday. They're gonna be here. So that's just the way the construction manager process.
That could be an item we ask in the interview.
Yeah. They're probably gonna be here that half hour before anybody starts working, and they'll be here a half hour after everybody goes home. It's that kind of supervision.
Councilmember Osmus?
Well, if there's a possibility we could save a 1%, open it up.
That'd be the only reason, because of all the reasons that we've tried to keep it confined, those all make sense to me, it should read off. The only thing is the money portion of it, and with a project of this size and blossoming every day, it would be good to be able to contain some of those costs as well.
It was supposed to be shrinking this fall. So,
That's kind of what I was hoping, but we're in full summer. All right.
spring's going fast.
Any other items of discussion? All right. Hearing none, motion to approve, or motion to adjourn?
So, second.
Meeting adjourned.